Has anybody seen Cher hanging around here? What's the problem? You blind, sugar? Hi, I like to play with toys. What's going on, everybody? So I really love the X-Men. The X-Men have always meant a lot to me for many reasons, which is why I've always wanted to do some type of really amazing X-Men themed diorama in the medium that I can do that in. If you're familiar with the X-Men, especially the cartoon and the comics, you get to see the Danger Room a lot, and you get to see the Savage Land a lot. If you're not familiar with the Savage Land, that is a separate little pocket universe, if you will, inside the X-Men universe where dinosaurs still live, and you have guys like Kazar and Shauna the She-Devil interacting with X-Men like Magneto and Sauron, who is one of the coolest and wackiest things ever. I have Sauron's first and second appearance in comic books, by the way. Ridiculous design, but love him to death. And the Danger Room is where the X-Men train. So I thought it would be kind of cool to not just make a basic Danger Room diorama or a basic Savage Land diorama, but have the Danger Room transforming into a hologram of the Savage Land. This is an idea I cooked up, kind of, I think, inspired by the original Photoshop extrude filter, as well as some of the things that were in the Fox X-Men movies where they had those morphing tables that showed like different maps. This originally was designed for like a 1/6 scale figure in mind. 1/6 scale meaning 12 inches tall or 1/6 of a human height. And I think Rogue looks amazing, or Anna Marie looks amazing in this diorama, as well as with her boy Gambit. I realized this diorama actually works just as well with 1/12 scale action figures, like Mr. Wolverine here from the Marvel Legends line with his glowy hot claws. I'm going to show you exactly how I made this diorama and all the techniques I used, and just share a little bit about my love of the X-Men and what they mean to me.
Let's not waste any time. This is a 24-inch by 24-inch by 1-inch thick piece of EPS foam, otherwise known as expanded polystyrene foam. There's a link below if you'd like to get some in smaller size sheets, but if you like this exact sheet that I'm using, you can go to your local Home Depot and get it in the roofing aisle, or they have them at Lowe's in a blue color. I'm just cutting out the base and the back wall using a Sharpie to draw on because it's easy to paint over on this foam material, and using metal rulers and a aluminum T-square and a extendable flat bladed box cutter to do multiple cuts until I get all the way through the foam to trim it off. And this is a hot wire cutting table. This is my old hot wire cutting table because this video is from over a year ago when I filmed this. If you'd like to get the one that I use now, a higher quality version, you can go ahead and check in the links below. They are pricey if you're new to this, but they're worth it if you plan on working with foam a lot. And all I'm doing is taking chunks of 2-inch thick foam, which can also be found in the roofing aisle at Home Depot, and trimming it into 1/2-inch squares, rectangular squares, and taking foam and trimming it down into more lengths that are 1/2-inch, and then turning that the other direction perpendicular and cutting those 1/2-inch lengths into 1/2-inch cubical square pieces, whatever you want to call them. And now I'm just laying them out on the base roughly where they're going to go and kind of getting a vibe and an idea for a pattern and a flow as far as the vertical chasing down and trajectory of the topography of where I want everything to lay out. So this took some time. If you'd like to see this diorama made in real time, it's available in the members only section. It's all 22 hours of this diorama is available for you to watch, and you can see everything that I'm talking about there. You can listen to my crazy life stories, and you can watch me do this for many hours. It's fairly entertaining. You can ask my channel members all about that. I do live streams as often as I'm able to on this channel, and do live work because I do think it is a fun, realistic take on how to do this stuff, and you get to see how long things really take. This diorama is currently for sale on my Etsy store, and it is priced according to the amount of work and labor it took to build and the expertise associated with it. But you see here me taking all of those little pieces I laid out and trimming them to unique heights to create a flow and an undulation that I was happy with. And that is basically all I did here for this grid on the bottom side and on the back side. And then I took those grid lines based on where I laid those topographical cubical extrusions, and I took my square there, which is that little yellow triangle. Yes, it's called a square. And I took my metal ruler and I traced out that grid that you see. This amazing collectible card set by Ultra Flare came out in 1995 when I was 9 years old. This gave me so much inspiration, seeing this incredible art from incredible artists who were just as passionate about these heroes and villains as I was. I can't tell you how many of these cards I drew and redrew. I learned about Boris Vallejo and his wife, Julie Bell, who became two of my favorite artists of all time because of this card set. This is a Marvel Masterpieces set that came out close to the time of the other set. This is Quasar. This is one of my favorite images from this set. This was done by the Hildebrandt brothers, who are some of my favorite artists as well. And this Rogue card is probably my favorite of the set. And that gold foil card got an interesting story behind it. Back to the diorama for now. You can see how much progress I made following that same pattern I just set, and I even cut into the diorama some negative holes and made some tinier squares that were about 1/4 of an inch by 1/4 of an inch just to add more geometric detail to the piece. For the Savage Land side of the diorama, I wanted to put a dinosaur footprint into the piece itself, so I sketched what I thought looked like a T-Rex foot or footprint, and I got my Dremel out with a material hogging off bit or a carving bit here and my router tip so that I could kind of route out that quote-unquote dinosaur shape from the bottom. I realized though that it kind of ended up looking more like a Psyduck foot from Pokemon, but you know, it still kind of implies the idea of a giant reptilian monster trudging through the Savage Land, which is what I was going for. I also mixed up this amazing material, which is 50% water, 50% Mod Podge or PVA glue if you have that. Links below if you need some. And toilet paper. Because toilet paper dissolves in water, you can dissolve it in water and glue and create basically a sculpting medium to add texture in different ways. And you can see here I'm just doing that with simply using gloved hands and fingers and a cheap paint brush, and I'm stippling it into place where I want it, which also allows me to blend it out thinner as it goes away from areas that I don't want as dense. And then I sprinkled some sand on just to add some more texture and embed some more texture into that gluey, sticky surface before it dried. The next step is using this wonderful green floral foam or expanded polyurethane foam. You can get this at most craft stores. You can order it online. You can get it in different size bricks for whatever you want, but it is crazy easy to carve using an extendable box cutter. You can pretty much just break pieces off and have it ending up looking like real rock. This is how we carved that rock wall. I just cut a piece that was the size that I needed and then started adding texture and detail to my liking until I was satisfied with it. Just spread down some white glue to glue this foam piece to the other foam piece. Just spread it evenly and smushed it in place, and no problem there. But the next step is crucial for the longevity of this foam and also to make it not easily damageable. You have to coat the foam with PVA glue or Mod Podge. You can do this in at least one layer. I like to do it in 2 or 3 layers, and I do it with the Mod Podge a little watered down. The thicker you lay the glue on, meaning like less watered down, the more detail will get deleted as the glue dries, because the glue is going to dry and shrink a little, and so if you have really, really sharp edges and details, they will round over just a little bit, but it's not very much. I would encourage you to experiment with this process as you go if you've never done it before. I also cut some little rocks to go into sort of the gradation, transforming, morphing hologram area to fit and look like they were part of the transformation, and I Mod Podged over those with a couple layers of glue so that they would be durable.
Probably one of my top 2 favorite X-Men characters, if not my favorite X-Men character, is my girl Rogue. I really, really love Rogue, and I actually had this exact card with the gold foil on it, and we were on the playground at elementary school trading our cards. I didn't want this. I didn't care about the gold foil. I didn't care about the girly cards. You know, I wanted Apocalypse and Wolverine. And later on, when I dug out my card collection, I realized by the time I was in my mid-30s, Rogue had become pretty much my favorite X-Men character, and I think probably tied maybe with Wolverine. Whereas as a kid, I used to love characters like Colossus and Nightcrawler a lot. I think because I was bullied as a kid, I was kind of the odd man out. I was the nerdy, artistic, chubby kid in the school full of rich, thin kids, you know, who had never really been needed to be drawn to that. They were always playing sports and things like that, and I was always playing with my action figures during recess and drawing X-Men characters in class and having the teacher yell at me because I couldn't pay attention without drawing. And later on, I found out I had ADD, and that's why I did that.
Now to make the tree, you're going to need some 1/4-inch thick foam core board like this, where it's poster board on the outside and foam core in the inside. And we're going to use this 3/4-inch PVC pipe as the trunk and the base of our tree that we're going to attach a root and a branch system to using hot glue, which I hate if you know my channel, but it does have some good uses. Here and there, I have to admit. But overall, I hate hot glue. But we're going to use it for this because it makes the most sense in this case. I'm making sure the first corner that I lay down for the root system is got a 90-degree corner that I'm aligning with the bottom and the trunk of the actual tree. And then I'm sketching on a cross-section vertical profile, just a side view basically, of the root system, or one of the pieces of the root system. And I'm tracing that on to my liking, and we're going to cut that out, and that will be the basis for the roots and the branches. You'll see here as I go exactly what I'm getting at. After marking a final vertical location on the PVC pipe with a pencil, I'm just using my hot glue gun. This is a construction hot glue gun, so it runs a little bit hotter and a little bit stronger than your typical hot glue, but you don't have to use one of these for this process. I just pulled mine out for this, and we stuck it onto the PVC pole to create the beginnings of our branch system. And we basically just repeat this process to create more roots and more branches to our liking. I hope you guys are digging this music. I composed this myself using just an app on my iPad. I fiddle around with music apps all the time. I was trying to go for sort of a X-Men animated theme lo-fi vibe. I hope I got there. Trying to make my music a little bit more chill and entertaining for folks who are listening. Tell me in the comments below what you think. Now comes a slightly more difficult part. I'm using a piece of scrap 2-inch thick foam to sculpt. We are literally going to be sculptors here and sculpt a 3-dimensional root system out of foam, and I'm changing material from the foam core and PVC tubing to this XPS or EPS foam, as I mentioned earlier, because it's going to be much easier to carve a complex compound curves and shapes out of to get the transitional roots where I want to have the grid pattern that's in the actual geometry and topography on the left side of the diorama transition into the topography of the Savage Land on the right side of the diorama. And this foam is going to be the best medium for that. It will make sense here as we go. But using this hot wire table to cut out my basic form, and then using the hot wire table to shave down my detailed shape saves a lot of time. You can do this with a box cutter, an extendable box cutter and knife, but you're not going to get as smooth of shapes. It's going to take more time, and you risk cutting yourself. So be mindful, be careful, and be safe, people. Now I've got my foam root system, if you will, sanded down and smoothed as well using 120 grit sandpaper. And now I have it pinned in place where I want it, and I'm using my extendable box cutter to transfer the gradation geometry onto the root system in line with the grid that I drew and traced on the bottom of the piece, so that it actually looks like it's coming up out of the ground and transitioning. I'll also cut some chunks out of this root system and add extruded square pieces right into the middle of some of the roots later, so that it looks like it's in the process of transitioning rather than just having this one root system in the middle of it. We'll also achieve that effect later with paint and texture. You'll see. The next step is taking this big apparatus or apparati that we created using all of this different foam and PVC and covering it with a healthy layer of aluminum foil. We're going to bend this on, crimp this on, tape this on with masking tape, and glue it on using this EPS glue. There's links below if you'd like to get some of this amazing glue that works amazing on just about anything, and it's perfect for this pink and blue type of foam work. Next step is to place our crazy looking aluminum foil apparatus back into the diorama and press fit it into place, make sure it fits nicely. And I went ahead and used this Gorilla Glue that does not melt the EPS foam, and then I used some of my EPS glue on that bottom piece of foam where it's joining foam to foam, spread it all nice and even so that it would have a nice strong bond, and then placed it in its final resting place in the diorama and made sure it was firmly in place before lifting it up.
I was drawn to Colossus because he was strong and powerful, and basically no one could push him around physically or emotionally. And at the same time, he was also, you know, in my recollection, especially from his episode in the cartoon, he was kind and helpful. And that really resonated with me as a good example to have power but be kind and reach out to save and help others. And I love Nightcrawler because he was shunned. He was traditionally ugly, you know, in the sense of looking like a scary monster, but he had nothing but compassion for people. He chose to see them as people who just didn't understand, and that it was okay that people were upset because they didn't understand. They just needed time and understanding and compassion. Hindsight, looking back, I can see that's probably why I gravitated towards Nightcrawler and Colossus a lot. Obviously, too, as a kid, Wolverine's cool because he's got 6 knives for hands.
As you can see, I have covered the entire tree, except for the foam part on the bottom, with masking tape. This process is necessary to glue the next material on, which is our texturing material, but this doesn't take as long as it probably looks like it does. It just takes maybe 30 minutes, 40 minutes at the most to cover a big tree like this with masking tape, and you want to get it as even and flat as possible. Don't feel bad if you feel like you need to tear off tiny pieces and just add tiny pieces. You want it to be relatively smooth so that it will have a nice bonding surface for the next step. We're going to use the exact same method we used before with a mixture that is half Mod Podge or half PVA glue and half water. We're going to spread that onto our masking tape tree, and then we're going to layer on toilet paper like we did on the ground there. But we're going to do this one just kind of maybe a little thinner and flatter to get a veiny sort of texture all across this tree. This toilet paper will achieve that for us. And if you just sort of wet the surface and then drape the toilet paper over it and then go back and stipple the toilet paper into the place that you want it with a Mod Podge and water soaked brush, especially a big brush like this. I like to use a big brush in this process. I think it works a little bit better. You just do it to your liking, and you may have to do 2 layers of this, or 1 and a partial layer is what I typically find in doing this texture, how I like to do it. But it is a pretty straightforward process. It's a little tedious, but the results turn out pretty great for sort of a swampy or a gnarly looking tree, which is what we're going for here in the Savage Land. Once you finish applying it, you're going to want to let it dry for at least 24 hours, but you're probably going to have to wait a good 2, maybe even 3 days, which is what I had to wait for this, so that all of the glue and toilet paper dries nice and hard. The next step here is adding more ground texture. I'm laying out Mod Podge where I want it on the ground, being careful to integrate it into the geometry carefully that I created, and putting it in the low spots, the negative cutouts that I did in the geometry. And I literally just went outside and got dirt, dry dirt from outside, don't get wet dirt, sifted it to a fineness that I liked, and am sprinkling it onto just PVA glue, Mod Podge, that I put in the places that I want it, and then tapping off back into that aluminum tray what I don't like, and just making sure the coverage is sufficient. After that's done, grab yourself some cheap flat black acrylic craft paint. I love using this stuff on this foam because, did I mention that it's cheap? And also it spreads really, really nicely with a wet brush, and it's cheap. Did I mention that? Oh yeah, it's cheap. But seriously, doing 2 or 3 thin layers of this paint spread evenly across your foam will protect it nice for the next step. We're going to use paint that is caustic directly onto the foam, but if we have a barrier between the foam and the next layer of paint, we can get away with using spray paint, which is what we're going to use next. As you can see, I let that paint dry overnight, and I even used some flat black spray paint to paint up into the crevices of the tree to make sure I had good coverage once that base layer of acrylic was protecting the foam. Now I moved it over to my bench on the other side of my shop, and I picked 3 blue colors that I liked. I've got a pretty big stock of spray paint all the time. I go through it pretty quick. I've got this really pretty sort of tealy, turquoisey tealy color that I used as a base, and I'm spraying intentionally not perfectly even so that there will be some shadows. That's why we started with black, so that the overspray and I guess underspray, where the spray doesn't get on some of those flat geometric surfaces, will have a natural shadow simply by the way that I'm painting it. And I am painting over onto the dirt a little bit on the bottom on purpose. I'll clean that up later. I went in with a highlight color, and I kind of sprayed in some areas that I wanted to stand out in the piece. I like to paint shading into things when I can, and paint highlights so that as I layer weathering and more things over the diorama, the pieces that I want to stand out or sections that I want highlighted will still shine through in the finished product. And this is what you can do with spray paint. Once you've got 2 or 3 thin layers of acrylic coating your foam, it won't melt your foam.
He's got 6 knives for hands. The aggressive nature of, like, I'm not going to take anything from anybody. I felt that way too at plenty of times being bullied as a kid. I wanted to have that strength and power and attitude where nobody could boss me around, and I could show them, like, why, hey, back off. But as you grow and mature, you kind of learn that that's actually not the most healthy attitude towards other people. Honestly, as I grow older, learning more about Wolverine as a character and the different types of story arcs he's been given, I think emotionally I connect more with characters like Wolverine now because he's lived a hard life. He's been through a lot of trauma. He's been mean to others. He's figured out how to help and be supportive and be protective, to not let his trauma completely dictate his life, but also know when to do good. So in some ways I connect a lot more with Wolverine than I did as a kid, for completely different reasons than you might think one might love Wolverine. There's something that really appeals to me looking back in my childhood, something about the tragic loner characters that I could relate to, in the sense that they knew they had something that they wanted to offer the world, but they felt stuck or trapped because of their circumstances.
As you can see, we are base coating the dirt areas of the Savage Land and also the transitional dirt areas going into the geometry of the Danger Room tiles, or cube shape extrusions, if you will. I just mixed this up using some burnt umber and some medium browns that I liked to get a color that I was happy with, and I went in and painted in all these little details by hand, which was fun but also tedious. But hey, that's what I got myself into when I chose to sculpt this thing this way. I'm now going back with a medium to lighter tone and just stippling on some detail color over that base coat. I actually used a little bit of orange and medium brown mixed in with, believe it or not, a little bit of gold. Gold actually can make rich looking soil look realistic and richer. There's something about that like sort of pyrite-esque minerally look that a little bit of gold gives dirt that I love in a rich soil. Rocks, we're just using a standard dry brushing technique where I take a wide, big, flat brush and I dab it in my sort of darker gray tone that I want to use as my base gray. I wipe most of it off and then I just kind of back and forth over the texture until I get it covered to my liking with some black and shadows underneath. Then I do the same thing with a lighter tone of gray, like a medium to light tone. I think this color is called granite gray, and the first color I was using was called pewter gray to get my stone grays over my shadow blacks. This is the cool part that really sells the illusion that your rocks are in the same environment as your dirt. I took the same color paint I mixed up for my base coat of dirt, and I got a really wet brush and I watered the paint down and I just spread the really wet paint all over the rocks that I just dry brushed before they were cured, and basically smeared it into place and dabbed it off with a paper towel to my liking. That makes the dirt that accumulated on the rocks in the environment match the dirt that's on the ground in the environment. I kind of refer to it as sort of atmospherics, or like the way nature just generally happens. We're just trying to emulate that by adding these washes and taking away these washes to our liking. The same color layering technique that I used on the dirt, I used on the tree. I just started with a brighter medium nutmeg to make it look more like a tree trunk or a brighter color, contrasted against the rock and the dirt, and a nice transition between the bright blue and the darker tones of the earth and stone. But I started with a medium and I went over it with dirty washes to my liking to add dirt and texture. Eventually incorporated some reds and gray tones, which you'll see in just a sec.
There's something that really appeals to me looking back in my childhood, loner characters that I could relate to in the sense that they knew they had something that they wanted to offer the world, but they felt stuck or trapped because of their circumstances emotionally, or in Rogue's case, physically. That's something that I learned to appeal to me later on, was this sort of strong, tragic, vulnerable characters who knew that they had to keep serving for the greater good regardless of their personal wants or needs. And Rogue is a character that I feel fits that bill. In some ways, she's emotionally alone. She's also very strong and powerful. So there's almost a tragic nature to her character with what she can offer the world, but what she can't have herself. I think that's always been intriguing to me, and more so as an adult. I love that type of character. So for me in the X-Men world, Rogue and Wolverine have always really appealed to me. As far as favorite villains go, I really like Apocalypse and Mr. Sinister. Probably Mr. Sinister a little bit more, just because he always looked really cool. I like the techno-organic science nature of his experiments in the cartoon. I always thought that was really cool and appealing. So I've always gravitated toward things of that nature. Even in the real world, things that I like. Looking back through these cards and thinking about the X-Men, I realize how much certain aspects of these things in subtle ways influenced my interests over the course of my life thus far. And I'm thankful for that, and I'm thankful to these artists.
As you can see, I used my airbrush that I showed a second ago to add shading into some of the crevices and edges. And then I took this really cool miniature miter box saw and cut through my hardened toilet paper texture on the tree to carry those grid lines I originally carved into the foam through, so that it would actually look like I was in the process of morphing or creating a hologram. Next step was to create some miniature ferns and plants using pre-made plastic plants from the hobby store in the floral aisle. I just got some hemostats to hold them together and stabbed a little hole where I wanted them in the foam base, put some hot glue, which I hate, and I got them in place, held them, let the hot glue cool, and we have little ferns. If you want more detailed instruction on how to do miniature plants in this way, go check out my miniature plants video. Also, while you're at it, you can check out the how to do miniature flock tutorial that I put up. The little green moss you see on the rocks, as well as some of the green grass you see in those little squares over onto the left that are divoted onto the grid on the blue side, are filled with that green flock that I made in a previous video. It's just applied by laying down some Mod Podge or some PVA glue as such, and sprinkling in the flock to your liking and letting it dry in place. It's very, very easy to make and very, very easy to apply. So go check out those videos when you're done here. The next step was to make these sort of swampy jungle vines. I used hemp twine and I made a slurry of brown paint, water, and Mod Podge. And I dipped the twine using my hemostats into that slurry, and then I rolled it in some bright green flock that I made. And once you do this, the twine will start to unravel, but you can set it in place and drape it how you want. You can even use little sewing needle pins like I did to hold things in place. Let that dry overnight and it will dry nice and hard and solid, and you'll have cool little vines covered in green mossy material that are dyed the color you want with your paint slurry. This last major step here was to use a clear acrylic pouring medium here, or basically a resin pour, to fill the dinosaur footprint puddle up. I love this Varathane Super Glaze tabletop resin. It's very simple and easy to use. You can get it in a small quantity and it's pretty straightforward. Just follow the directions on the back of the box, accurately mix it the way they ask you to mix it, and you shouldn't have any problems. And if you do it correctly and slowly, you'll be able to mix it with minimal bubbles, and when it pours, the bubbles will come to the top, so you won't have a bunch of ugly bubbles in your little dinosaur footprint puddle. One little trick I discovered was, after you pour the resin into a muddy puddle like this, take a brush you don't mind ruining, especially a soft brush, and brush up the edges of that acrylic resin up onto the shore of the mud. It'll make it look like the surrounding mud is wet and it's seeping into the dirt. This is a barbecue lighter I'm using to pop the bubbles on the top of the resin so that you don't have resin hardened bubbles on top. Barbecue lighter works fine for this, and it's not going to melt the foam. Hey you! I hope you liked that video. Thank you for watching me build this insane Danger Room diorama. Again, this took like, I think over 32 hours in total, and there's 22, 23 hours of that live that was done on YouTube, and it's accessible in the members only section. If you want to watch the first of those live streams, you can. It's available to the public in my Art in Real Time series playlist. But if you'd like to watch the other, I think 7 live streams that took to do this diorama, you can consider becoming a channel member. There's almost 100 hours of content available to all channel members. There's exclusive content for the workshop masters, and there's a lot of stuff that I post in the community tab where I share how-to stuff as I'm doing it in picture form. I will leave you with me showing you some of my favorite X-Men collectibles, and tell me in the comments below what you liked about the video, what you thought about the song, what you would do different in your own Danger Room diorama, and we'll see you later. Thanks for watching. Here's the first appearance of the Phoenix, X-Men number 101. 100 points to anyone in the comments who can tell me why this book is important to Wolverine. This is X-Men number 4 from the 90s Jim Lee run. A lot of people are familiar with this book because it's the first appearance of Omega Red, but it is also the first time
that Rogue lets Gambit take her on a date. Jubilee jokes that he's going to take her to Taco Bell. Myself and Mrs. Euler's Workshop are really excited for X-Men 97. This is actually the comic adaptation of the 90s cartoon. This is issue 1, which features the first appearance in comics of my boy Morph. Speaking of the X-Men animated series comic adaptation, this is an original page of art from issue 10, and it's page 14. I got this off Heritage Auctions a while back because it had original Rogue art, and it's a full body image of Rogue and Avalanche, and I remember this episode. I had to go for it, and nobody really seemed to be bidding on it, so I don't know if I got lucky or if I'm just the only one interested in X-Men Adventures adaptation original page art, but I'm happy to have this in my collection. 100 points in the comments to anyone who can tell me why this book is important to the X-Men.